Dear ones, there is so much that needs healing and repair in this nation. This day, this moment that we are in has trails and threads that go back generations. The wounds that we are carrying in our bodies come from decades, from generations, even from centuries before us. And yet it is us here in this moment and time holding the possibility of healing, of transformation, of birthing a new world. In the novel, The Red Tent, the doulas and midwives in Dinah's biblical Jewish community knew a secret for when labor got difficult, for when birthing became dangerous. That secret was song. There was a song that they held in their hearts and broke out when mothers were in danger, when no more tools or water or breathing or turning or pushing was working. They sang a sweet melody of rhythm and love, stitching the worlds, repairing the breaks of fear and pain, crisscrossing from this side of the veil to that one and calling the baby forth with gentle guidance, giving the mother breath and movement through the pain. Song. This is a spiritual tool that stitches us together. It weaves our hearts in rhythm with one another. It moves mysteriously through fear and pain, and it carries us to the other side. This moment that we are in as a nation is like a labor. And whether it is the labor of birth or death, or both, I do not know. I only know that we are in it, and our work now is to breathe and move and heal and labor. And when we need it, to sing. Yesterday, more than 70 Unitarian Universalists went canvassing with Common Ground in Milwaukee Housing Authority apartment buildings, asking the people living there what they need in their living situation, and talking with them about building power to make change. Common Ground has been in accountable relationship with people living in these buildings for the last year and a half, documenting housing challenges from crime and safety to rodent and pest infestations to rent mismanagement. In their work to reform public housing and build a tenants union in Milwaukee, Common Ground has held the Housing Authority accountable for negligence, for poor living conditions, for mismanagement. And the people who are living in those public housing buildings have been banding together to build their power to change the material conditions of their living situation by organizing. Yesterday, and again after church today, UU's knocked on doors of people living in Milwaukee and asked them about their lives, about their homes. They documented any problems, and they shared a number to call if anything needed to be addressed. At one of the homes that our folks knocked on yesterday, a woman told our canvassers that her heat was off. Now, she had a 3-year-old, and she assumed that she was going to have to wait until Monday for there to be heat in her home again, because she thought the housing authority was closed on the weekend. But because of the organizing work for housing reform, now there's a number that you can call on the weekends, and our canvassers stayed with her while she called that number, got a hold of somebody who said that they would come out immediately and turn that heat back on. So after the first question about your living conditions, your home, how are you? The second question of the person behind the door living in public housing is, are you registered to vote? And then, after talking about life and living conditions, the canvassers would explain that one of the ways communities build power and hold election officials accountable is through voting. That's how democracy is supposed to work. Elected officials are supposed to represent the people and then negotiate with other people representing other people for fair processes, for fair institutions, for fair distribution of resources. That's the ideal that we Unitarian Universalists hold when we talk about justice as one of our faith values. Inclusive democratic processes where every human being gets a say in how things work. That's how it should be. That kind of inclusive democracy is an ideal. It's what we're striving for. But dear ones, it is not necessarily how it works. From gerrymandering to Milwaukee sending more taxes to the state than it gets back in revenue, to public schools that have to enroll every student being underfunded, while private schools that routinely reject kids with disabilities and LGBTQ kids and kids that need more attention, getting all of the resources that they need. All of those are just examples of how democratic processes are not working right now. We are not living in the ideal that we dream about as Unitarian Universalists today. And of course, you all know this is nothing new. There's not some shining beacon in the past when democracy was working perfectly well. It wasn't true that we had an inclusive democracy during Jim Crow. It wasn't true that we had an inclusive democracy when women couldn't vote. It wasn't true that we had an inclusive democracy when voting was restricted to only white men who owned property. Real democracy, the democratic ideal of our Unitarian Universalist value of justice, includes everyone having a say in how the society in which we live runs. But that ideal has always been a struggle. It's always been a struggle. It's always been an ideal we've been working for, reaching for, laboring for, struggling for. I know that that struggle feels intense and scary today. It is true that there is a real movement towards fascism in the United States that we are resisting in our struggle for democracy today. There are people right now advocating that only property-owning white Christian men should be able to vote. There are even people that are saying we should end voting entirely because it is getting in the way of white Christian nationalism ruling our country. That's scary. That's a scary reality. There is a lot on the line. There's a lot that we could lose in this election. It's scary to think that we might lose the right to vote, or that entire groups of our siblings could lose a variety of different rights. Everyone who is working this election and who has been working for democracy for the last year, 2 years, 5 years, everyone who has their voting plan ready, everyone who's called up their friends and relatives and asked them about their voting plan, everyone who is doing that work is pushing against fascism, is resisting its cruelty, and is working to repair the pain it has caused. Thank you for your labor. We keep doing this work. We keep struggling for the ideal of democracy because it is part of our vision of the world as it should be. It is part of the world we are reaching for. But even though it is scary today, we need to know that we have always had to struggle for democracy. We need to remember that there's not some pure time in the past when democracy was true and uncontested and when everyone was treated with equal rights and equitably throughout society. That time, the time of the ideal of democracy, of inclusive practices and justice, that's a vision that we hold in the future. That's the vision that we wake up with our minds stayed on. That's the vision of the world that we are in the process of laboring for. We are in the struggle to create that possibility, to create the possibility of a better future. We're doing this work for democracy not for a particular candidate, not for a party, but for a vision, for a hope of a real and true inclusive democracy that includes the conditions for mutual thriving of all human beings and all beings. This labor that we're doing, it's about working so that all of the kids, our queer kids, our trans kids, our Black kids, our Indigenous kids, all of our kids of diverse races and identities and abilities have the opportunity to not just be safe, but to be valued and celebrated as who they are. We're in this struggle so that all people might have access to the resources they need to thrive, from education to healthcare to clean drinking water. We're in the struggle for justice and inclusive democracy because every life being inherently worthy means every human being having the access to thriving, not just to being okay, not just to not being attacked, but to thriving, to joy, to opportunity. One of the men yesterday who answered the door when our Unitarian Universalist canvassers were knocking on more than 400 doors said that he had never voted. He was 60 years old, and he had been convicted of a felony when he was 18. And he did not think that he had the right to vote. He was afraid. After he got out of prison, he heard a story of another man who had also been convicted of a felony and tried to vote and got sent back to jail. And this man was too afraid to ever risk that. And even though he had asked people over the years whether they thought he would be able to vote, no one could tell him for sure. And so he never did. He was 60. He had been convicted of a felony at 18, and he had always wanted to vote, but he was afraid. So our canvassers assured him that in Wisconsin, he can vote. Voting rights in Wisconsin are restored after a convicted felon completes their sentence, including incarceration and probation and parole and supervision. Once the sentence is complete, that person who was incarcerated has the right to vote. This man had been off paper for decades, and he was thrilled to learn that his right to vote was fully restored in Wisconsin. So he told our UU canvasser, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. This is part of the work of relationality, of connecting with every human being, of really seeing a person in front of us and saying, you too have a say in the society and how it runs, how its resources are distributed, what the processes are. But this moment that we're in, these conversations that we're having right now, knocking on doors, seeing our neighbors, asking people about their voting plans, they are just a snippet. They're just a piece in a long haul struggle for that vision of the world that we're dreaming about. No matter what happens this week, no matter what happens, there is more to life, to the laboring of the new world coming into being. There is more to what we want to create than this one piece of labor. We have to remember that no matter what happens this week, fascism is building power in the United States, and we have to build power to counter it. That's the long-haul struggle. We have to resist and repair and build relationship and build communities of mutual aid and support and thriving, no matter what happens this week. Whatever happens in this election, there is so much to be done to bring the world that is still possible into being. And that's what we're holding together. So today and tomorrow and the next day and the day after that, we will face the monsters together. The specter of fascism, the varieties of threat and loss. We will face those monsters with one another, with our labor, with our consistency, with our presence, and when we need it, with song. We will face the birth of the new world, which is still coming, no matter what happens, and the death of the old world, which is still dying. We will face those things with our breath and our labor. I have attended births and deaths, and there is a rhythm to the work of bringing life into being and of letting life go. Crossing the veil of becoming into being and of being into non-being is a long, sometimes painful, sometimes dangerous labor of peaks and valleys of pain and release. In birth and in death, I have sat on the floor of the bedroom breathing and feeling the contractions of the present moment as the pain gathers around the movement through worlds. There is a hum that happens in this labor, a rhythm. Energy, it gathers, it moves, it ripples through the bodies of the people in the room and through the person laboring. And that energy requires our focused attention, our mind stayed on freedom, our strength, and our courageous hearts. Fear interrupts the flow of this intense energy. There is no space in labor for fear, no room for judgment or attempts at control. In labor, in that intense, energetic movement of coming into being, we have to lock into the present and trust the Spirit and be not afraid. At one birth I attended, the laboring person had found a position and a rhythm that was working for her. She was leaning against her dresser and she was rocking and she was humming. I was in the corner moving with her and singing under her song, and as we were getting into that place where she was doing her work, another attendant came into the room, anxious about something. I don't remember what. She was talking about timing and tools and if we were prepared for the next steps. She was afraid, and she brought a busy, controlling energy into the room, and with that fearful energy's entrance, the laboring mother cried out in pain. The fear interrupted her rhythm, And the pain that is part of labor, which had been under control, it suddenly wasn't. It was wild and loud, and we all had to tune in again and find the rhythm again with one another and pick up her laboring song. When we are bringing new worlds into being, when we are letting old worlds go, there is an intense, energetic process. To move with this energy requires labor and art and rhythm and sometimes song. This laboring of a new world that we are in today, it is not easy. And the days are becoming full of a grand hotel of feelings and full of doings of canvassing and spreadsheets and phone calls and questions. They are also full of the long-term labor for the world that is becoming. The long-term labor that we are still doing today, from working for housing reform to caring for and protecting our children to being in an accountable relationship to anti-war organizing to building power for the long haul. Fear interrupts the flow of this labor. It interrupts the rhythm of this work. It stops us from being present to the new world that is becoming and to the work that it takes to surrender what has been lost. Fear stops us from hearing one another, from listening to the person behind the door story, from the pain of the person right in front of us. Fear shuts us down from empathy and understanding and repair. Ultimately, fear stops change because it shuts down our hope and our imagination, our vision of the other world that we are part of birthing. We need to hold the beauty of that world, where democracy is inclusive and every kid has access to the resources they need and all the people are working together for mutual thriving. So this week, as scary as it is, and it is scary, dear ones, as consequential as it is, and it is consequential, dear ones, may we stay present to this one particular contraction towards a world of mutual thriving. May we resist the fear, not let it interrupt our flow. May we be not afraid. Because change, it's coming. That new world we're birthing, she is on her way. And when the birth is troubled, if you're feeling doubt or afraid, dear ones, sing. May it be so.